Committee will come to order. I'd like to begin this hearing by stating the Oversight Committee mission statement. We exist to secure two fundamental principles. First, Americans have a right to know that the money Washington takes from them is well spent. And second, Americans deserve an efficient, effective government that works for them. Our duty on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee is to protect these rights. Our solemn responsibility is to hold government accountable to taxpayers because taxpayers have a right to know what they get from their government. We will work tirelessly in partnership with citizen watchdogs to deliver the facts to the American people and bring genuine reform to the Federal bureaucracy. This is the mission of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everybody to this hearing today, which is entitled Status of U.S. Foreign Assistance to Afghanistan in Anticipation of the U.S. Troop Withdrawal. I'd like to welcome Ranking Member Tierney, members of the subcommittee, and members that are joining us here today in the audience. Today's hearing is critical because Afghanistan is consistently the leading recipient of U.S. foreign assistance. This assistance continues, but our greatest contribution to the future of Afghanistan has been the sacrifice of 1,795 U.S. military personnel. In addition, 19,665 Americans have been wounded in action since September 11, 2001. We can never forget them. We owe them so much gratitude for their sacrifice for this nation. And there are countless others that have taken time away from their families and their careers to serve on behalf of the United States of America. Since 2002, the United States government has appropriated more than $102 billion for relief and reconstruction in Afghanistan. That does not include the war fight. That does not include our troops. That does not include the food for our troops or the military equipment. This is for relief and reconstruction. In recent years, the United States and other donors have funded about 90% of Afghanistan's total public expenditures. Of that 90%, the United States contributed roughly 62%. The United States continues to make substantial military and financial commitments in Afghanistan. Meanwhile, Afghanistan is perhaps the most corrupt nation on the face of the planet. We know this. It's not a secret. The challenges in properly overseeing the assistance we provide Afghanistan are already difficult in the current environment with a United States military presence. For example, on-site monitoring is often restricted by security concerns. These challenges will only grow as U.S. troops leave Afghanistan. I've traveled to Afghanistan several times with the support, the help, and the protection of the United States military, which is drawing down its efforts. The hearing will focus on this pivotal question. If we can't sufficiently oversee the billions of dollars we're spending now, should we continue spending billions with less visibility, less oversight, less security? And yet you'll find through this hearing that we're actually going to be spending more money than ever in Afghanistan, which I think would be a surprise to most Americans. At the same time, the national security and economic stakes of our mission in Afghanistan are higher than ever. Therefore, we must ensure our aid programs are properly monitored. American taxpayers cannot afford to have their hard-earned dollars sent overseas only to find our aid efforts plagued by waste, fraud, and abuse. Americans deserve better, and so do our international partners. Ranking Member Tierney and I have held numerous bipartisan subcommittee hearings addressing some of the worst cases of waste, fraud, and abuse encumbering effective U.S. foreign assistance in Afghanistan. The subcommittee, prior to my even joining this committee, had been doing and working on this. The subcommittee has investigated petroleum, oil, and lubricants provided to the Afghan National Army by the United States, totaling nearly $500 million. Meanwhile, the Defense Department failed to properly maintain receipts for these transactions, and the Department of Defense wants to give them even more money. We've also investigated Daywood Hospital, where the United States provided more than $150 million in medical supplies in just an 18-month period. Unfortunately, theft, mismanagement, and human suffering became rampant at Daywood. We still don't have the proper accounting on that. In 2012, a $1 billion bank scandal, one of the worst in banking history, erupted at the Kabul Bank. We'll talk more about that later. Corruption in Afghanistan is likely the biggest threat to our ability to effectively administer foreign assistance. We're now at a point where uncertainty of troop levels beyond 2014 in Afghanistan will hinder our ability to effectively administer foreign aid. This administration's failure to secure a bilateral security agreement with the Afghan government means that agencies like USAID are left guessing how much on-site monitoring of aid programs will be possible. But again, we're going to be spending more money, giving more money direct to the Afghan government than ever before. Yesterday, the Senate Armed Services Committee held a hearing and heard from the Defense Department that because of an absence of a signed bilateral security agreement, Department of Defense will begin planning for various contingencies in Afghanistan. Today, I look forward to hearing from USAID's contingency plans. We need to know that U.S. foreign assistance to Afghanistan will be properly monitored after the withdrawal of our troops. In 2012, I held a subcommittee hearing assessing the transition from a military to a civilian-led mission in Iraq. The transition in Iraq was an unprecedented mission for the State Department, and our diplomatic corps functioned without the protections of a typical host nation. The USAID Inspector General's office testified that, quote, according to the USAID mission, the security situation has hampered its ability to monitor programs. Mission personnel are only occasionally able to travel to the field for site visits, end quote. Afghanistan is likely to offer even greater challenges, and I want us to learn from our experiences in Iraq. In that 2012 hearing, I asked the witnesses to think towards the future and planning for the transition in Afghanistan. Today, we're much closer to that transition, and I look forward to hearing from our witness panel. Now I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, a ranking member, somebody who's poured an awful lot of energy into this issue and understands it quite well, Mr. Tierney, for his opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the hearing. And this is, as you mentioned, the third in a series of hearings held by the full committee and the subcommittee on national security in the 113th Congress, and about the challenges of administering and overseeing foreign aid in Afghanistan. So today's hearing is going to focus on the civilian side of development efforts in light of the planned drawdown of the United States military forces. Mr. Chairman, as you know, the vast majority of foreign assistance in Afghanistan is not managed by USAID, but by the Defense Department. Since 2002, the vast majority of that money, $59 billion, is for the Defense Department's programs to train, equip, and sustain the Afghan national security forces. We've had a number of hearings on that in the past, and I know that, or I believe that you agree with me that we ought to do more hearings on that as we go forward. Even this year, when we plan to draw down many of our troops, we still plan to spend more than 4 times as much on Defense Department assistance programs than we will on civilian assistance programs. USAID's share is still substantial, however. Over $15 billion has been invested since 2002. We have to ensure that in Afghanistan, as in other high-risk locations, USAID is properly managing and accounting for how the taxpayer dollars are being spent. This includes improving efforts to collect data and monitor and evaluate program performance and outcomes. Assistant to the Administrator Sampler brings some significant experience to the table on this, having lived in Kabul and traveled to Afghanistan or Pakistan over 60 times, as I understand. I look forward to Mr. Sampler's testimony today on what USAID is doing and what they can do to still keep its personnel and its partners' personnel safe and to ensure the accountability of taxpayer funds in Afghanistan. This subcommittee and the full committee have also taken a closer look at the administration's policy of providing assistance directly to the Afghan government, which the Chairman just mentioned. A recent Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction report raised serious concerns over USAID's decision to move forward with direct assistance at 7 Afghan ministries, despite external audits identifying many deficiencies at these ministries, deficiencies that have not been corrected. While I understand that USAID takes a different view of the actual risk to taxpayer funds, it would be unfair to only focus on this report today in the absence of our Inspector General, John Sopko. Nevertheless, I look forward to hearing more about how USAID is ensuring that direct assistance in Afghanistan, how it's protecting from waste, fraud, and abuse, especially given the endemic corruption that exists in Afghanistan. At our full committee hearing nearly 1 year ago, Inspector General Sopko raised serious concerns that the drawdown of the United States military will limit the ability of U.S. personnel to directly oversee projects, both because of security concerns and because movement can only be supported within a 1-hour round trip of any medical facility. This could limit access to some reconstruction sites, including the $75 million USAID-funded Kajaki Dam project. Although the Inspector General is not here today, I look forward to hearing whether the Government Accountability Office is experiencing some of those same challenges to access. Mr. Chairman, as you know, USAID operates in some of the most challenging parts of the world, including Pakistan, Iraq, and South Sudan. And in these locations, USAID does not depend on the United States military either for their personnel security or to facilitate direct oversight of their projects. We may want to hear some of how that works in those locations and how it may apply to this situation going forward. There are currently 34,000 United States troops in Afghanistan. By the end of this year, there will be 12 or 10 or perhaps 8,000 troops remaining to train and equip missions, as well as limited counterterrorism operations. Yet conditions on the ground, most prominently President Karzai's refusal to sign the bilateral security agreement, has led President Obama to recently ask our military to consider a complete withdrawal by the end of the year. I hope that today's hearing will be the beginning of additional hearings focusing on the administration's policy regarding a continued troop presence, whether it should in fact be a zero option or whether it should be 2, 4, 6, 8, 12, or however many troops. One line of question will certainly be, if the zero option or close to it is chosen, or if relatively few troops are maintained in Afghanistan, will any portion of them be utilized to ensure oversight of USAID programs? Are they necessary or desirable for such tasks? What are the other options to ensure safe oversight of USAID projects and spending? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I remind members that they have 7 days to submit opening statements for the record. We're now going to recognize our first panel. Mr. Sampler is the Assistant to the Administrator of the Office of Afghanistan and Pakistan Affairs at the U.S. Agency for International Development, often referred to as USAID. Mr. Johnson is the Director of International Affairs and Trade at the U.S. Government Accountability Office. I want to thank both of you gentlemen for your expertise, your commitment to our country and our nation. I know you care deeply about her, and your expertise is appreciated here today. We're going to ask some difficult questions, but again, don't let there be any question about your personal patriotism, your commitment to our nation. But this is a good back and forth with the United States Congress, and we appreciate your being here today. With that, we will now, as pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses need to be sworn before they testify. So if you will please rise and raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. You may be seated. Let the record reflect that the witnesses both answered in the affirmative. In order to allow time for discussion, we would appreciate you limiting your testimony to 5 minutes, but given that there are 2 panel members and only 1 panel, feel free to take a little bit of liberty with that. Just also know that your entire written statement will be made part of the record. With that, we will now recognize Mr. Sampler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your remarks. You're welcome. Thank you both very much for allowing me the opportunity to testify today and discuss the role of the U.S. Agency for International Development in Afghanistan. We understand the fiscal reality that our nation faces at home means that resources available for Afghanistan will decline. This is going to require tough decisions, prioritizing investments so that we identify the ones with the greatest potential for long-term sustainability. We're committed to safeguarding taxpayer funds and to ensuring that the development progress in Afghanistan is maintained and made durable. I've been working on and in Afghanistan, both in civilian and military capacities, since 2002. In addition to having worked with the Afghan Emergency Law Jirga, the Constitutional Law Jirga, I've served as a representative of an international NGO. I was the Chief of Staff of the UN Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, and I've been a civilian representative of both the Departments of State and USAID. I bring all these perspectives to my work and to my testimony today. After the fall of the Taliban regime, I saw firsthand an Afghanistan that had been utterly destroyed by decades of war. In 2002, Afghanistan was starting with literally nothing. However, since that time, positive developmental trends have been truly remarkable, and they strongly reflect areas of USAID and U.S. government interest and investment. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton recently said, "When women succeed, the world succeeds." Well, in Afghanistan today, there are over 3,000 women-owned businesses and associations. Almost 20% of Afghans enrolling in higher education or college are women, and women are active participants in Afghan political processes. On the UNDP Human Development Index, it's an important global metric for development professionals, Afghanistan made the largest gains on a percentage basis of any country in the past decade. In 2002, there were less than 900,000 Afghan children in school. Today, there are almost 8 million Afghan children in school, and 30% of those are girls. With respect to health, one of the areas where we've made the most progress, life expectancy has increased from 42 years to 62 years in Afghanistan. Maternal mortality rates have decreased by over 80%. and child mortality has decreased by 50%. Again, in 2002, less than 6% of the Afghan population had access to electricity. Today, that number is approximately 20%. And finally, in 2002, there were no fixed telephone lines, and if I wanted to make a call out of the country, it required a satellite phone. Today, the combined phone networks cover 90% of the population of Afghanistan. 85% of the women in Afghanistan have access to a cell phone. And the telecommunications sector is Afghanistan's greatest source of foreign direct investment, the largest remitter of taxes to the government of Afghanistan, and the biggest listed employer, providing over 100,000 jobs. To assist the Afghans in securing these important gains and to enable them to build on these gains, USAID is engaged with the U.S. interagency and with other donors to ensure that we have a transition policy that's sound, and I'm happy to talk about that today. We're also focused on ensuring that the Afghan government remains accountable during the transition process. At a senior officials meeting in Kabul last July, I announced a U.S. incentive fund of $75 million. These funds would be released to the Afghan government as they met specific thresholds of progress in 5 key areas: elections, subnational governance, human rights, public finance, and economic growth. To date, we've released $30 million of the $75 million. We have denied $30 million of the $75 million for inadequate progress, and $15 million is still in play, pending Afghan performance. USAID places high priority on ensuring that American taxpayer dollars are used wisely, effectively, and only for the intended purpose. In a post-2014 environment, it will continue to be a difficult place to operate, and we know that we will face challenges in the delivery of development assistance. Looking ahead, I believe the main challenges we face will be a volatile and uncertain security situation, oversight and monitoring of a complex and still robust portfolio, and the Afghan capacity for governance at all levels and in all sectors, which continues to grow. But to be clear, USAID will terminate or redesign programs if we determine that a particular program cannot be adequately overseen or that it is not making adequate progress. One developmentally sound technique for building Afghan capacity to sustain the gains we've made so far and to allow the United States to transition out of our assistance program over time is government-to-government or direct assistance. USAID has a rigorous system of oversight for direct assistance programming with the Afghan government. It's complicated, different ministries have different strengths and weaknesses, and different programs are funded in different ways. But in summation, there are a number of multiple levels of protection that we use to identify and mitigate risk before we disperse any funds. We may require the establishment of a non-commingled separate bank account for each project. We disperse funds only after USAID has verified that a particular milestone has been reached or after we've verified the accrued costs. We require an annual audit by a USAID Inspector General approved external audit firm. We will insist on substantial involvement in ministerial procurement processes. All direct assistance requires compliance with USAID accountability and oversight procedures. This includes site visits. If Afghanistan ministries fail to adhere to these measures, the agreements are subject to immediate suspension or termination. In conclusion, let me say that USAID is always mindful of the enormous sacrifices made by Americans, our allies, our Afghan partners to build and secure a stable Afghanistan. And we fully understand the need for constant vigilance, particularly during this delicate transition period. Whether in the military, as a government civilian, as an implementing partner, I personally know the risks and sacrifices my brothers and sisters in the services have made, and their families have made as well, and I thank them also for their service. We are under no illusions about the challenges, though, that we continue to face in Afghanistan. Problems of limited capacity and corruption certainly exist in Afghanistan, just as they do in many of the other places where we operate. And they will continue to be a challenge for us, as was noted. However, these problems are not reasons to abandon our vital national interests. Instead, they are reasons to redouble the care and diligence of our efforts as we assist Afghanistan and as we pursue U.S. national interests. It's an honor to be able to share with you today a glimpse of what USAID is doing in that regard, and I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sampler. We'll now recognize Mr. Johnson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Tierney, members of the subcommittee, I'm pleased to be here today on behalf of the GAO to discuss 3 issues relating to USAID's efforts in Afghanistan that we outlined in our most recent Afghanistan Key Issues and Contingency Contracting reports. These issues are the continued need for oversight and accountability, the need for continued monitoring and evaluation of projects, and the importance of planning in advance for the withdrawal of combat troops. Before I delve into these issues, it is important to point out that various factors such as the security environment, the prevalence of corruption, which Mr. Sampler pointed out, and the limited capacity of the Afghanistan government have challenged U.S. efforts. Now, with respect to oversight and accountability of funds, we have found that USAID did not always conduct pre-award risk assessments to identify and mitigate against risks of providing direct assistance to Afghan ministries. While USAID took some steps since our report to complete risk assessments, recent Inspector General reporting indicates that USAID may not have mitigated for all identified risks. We also reported that USAID generally relied on multilateral organizations to ensure accountability over direct assistance provided through the Afghan Reconstruction Trust Fund. However, we found that USAID had not consistently complied with its risk assessment policies in awarding funds to the trust fund. And following up on our recommendation for action, we learned that USAID did take steps later in awarding additional funds to the trust fund to conduct pre-award risk assessments. With respect to monitoring and evaluation, which we also point out is a very important control that needs to be put in place, while USAID has taken steps to improve the management of its programs, various factors continue to challenge its ability to monitor program effectiveness. These factors include inconsistencies in USAID's application of its performance management procedures, shortfalls in maintaining institutional knowledge, and missed opportunities to enhance oversight and management of contractors. Concerning the application of performance management procedures, we previously noted that USAID did not always follow its performance management procedures, which, among other things, call for USAID to collect, analyze, and interpret performance data. While USAID took action in response to our recommendation, once again, results of recent oversight have raised concerns about its continued efforts. Concerning institutional knowledge, USAID has historically faced obstacles in this area. Frequent staff turnovers have made it more difficult for USAID to analyze and interpret performance data. Further, according to a recent USAID report, the majority of the Foreign Service national staff in Afghanistan have applied for special immigrant visas to the United States, potentially leaving the agency at risk of losing key staff with institutional knowledge. Concerning oversight and management of contractors, we recently reported that USAID had identified increasing performance reviews as one of its highest priorities with respect to the performance reviews of their contractors. We also reported that USAID had established a working group to, among other things, develop a compendium of best practices and lessons learned for monitoring projects in a non-permissive environment. USAID, however, missed opportunities to leverage institutional knowledge by not assessing if the mission-level policies and procedures should be considered agency-wide. In response to our recommendation, USAID has noted that it will create a working group to gather and share lessons learned. Finally, with respect to planning for future development efforts in Afghanistan, USAID's ability to conduct mission and monitor its projects in Afghanistan is likely to be challenged by the planned withdrawal of combat troops. Additionally, finalizing plans for the post-combat environment is complicated by the absence of a signed bilateral security agreement. As combat troops continue to withdraw from Afghanistan, USAID's opportunities to directly monitor programs in certain parts of Afghanistan may be challenged, given that the military presence helped USAID gain access to less secure areas. As such, USAID will need to plan for how it will continue monitoring its projects and what is more likely to be, or just as likely to be, and remain in a non-permissive environment. In closing, as the United States plans for the withdrawal of combat troops and transition to a civilian-led presence, it is important to have safeguards in place to help ensure sustainment of our gains. This will require continued oversight and accountability of U.S. funds, consistent application of USAID's monitoring and evaluation policies, planning for challenges that are likely to result from the withdrawal of combat troops. Undertaking these steps, we believe, may help to better ensure accountability and could lessen the likelihood of waste, fraud, and abuse. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, members of the subcommittee, once again, I thank you for the opportunity to testify. This concludes my opening statement. I'd be happy to take any questions for the record.
Thank you. I thank you both. Now recognize myself for 5 minutes. I want to start, Mr. Sampler, with my understanding is we have about $20 billion that has yet to be dispersed in Afghanistan. Yet I'm looking at this SIGAR report. This is the Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction. We refer to it as SIGAR. And here's the concern. I have general concerns overall about USAID's forward program. It's laudable to set goals, but I really have deep concerns about this. And let me just read part of this assessment that came out in January of 2014. Ernst & Young and KPMG came in and did assessments. All of the 16 ministries assessed, quote, were unable to manage and account for funds unless they implemented recommendations, end quote. There were 696 recommendations that were made. And yet here I'm finding that SIGAR found that USAID required that ministries only implement 24 of the 333 recommended risk mitigation measures prior to receiving funds. The report says, quote, although USAID Afghanistan concluded in each of the 7 risk reviews that the ministry was unable to manage direct assistance funds without a risk mitigation strategy in place, and that the mission would not award direct assistance to the ministry, quote, under normal circumstances, end quote, USAID Afghanistan signed the agreements with each of the reviewed ministries to approve direct assistance programs. As the report points out, the U.S. government has committed to providing at least 50% of its developmental aid to Afghanistan through on-budget assistance to the Afghan government. We're talking about 50% of $20 billion. And yet none of the ministries could even pass the basic test by the outside groups that you cited in your opening statement as coming in and doing the audit. Why are we doing this? That was a question, yes.
Congressman, thank you. We are in Afghanistan because we were attacked from Afghanistan.
No.
We're not doing this.
No, wait. We don't need the history of why we're there. The reality is we're there. We've invested lives. Americans have given their lives. Last thing we want to do is just abandon and forget, and we've invested a lot there. I'm concerned about giving tens of billions of dollars to the most corrupt foreign country that there is. This is the most corrupt nation on the face of the planet, and we're going to give them tens of billions of dollars with less oversight than ever. Why are we doing that?
Congressman, let me just challenge the question from the SIGAR report, if I may. It was an audit of our audits. Our audits were found to be sound, as you noted. They audited 13 ministries, and it was a soup-to-nut audit of all the risk in all the ministries that we could identify.
I believe it was 16 ministries, but go ahead.
We're not working with all of those ministries. We're working with 7. That was a deliberate decision based on development needs, the needs of the government, and U.S. government priorities. So in those 7 ministries, we again identified every possible risk we could through these audits. But we focus on projectized money. We don't give money to the government of Afghanistan. We spend money on projects with the government of Afghanistan. And that's what's missing in the SIGAR audit, is a recognition that
there's no direct assistance, no on-budget assistance. You're telling me there's no dollars going direct to the Afghan government?
There's some terms of art, Congressman, and forgive me if this sounds bureaucratic. When we talk about doing direct assistance, that's programs that we do with ministries of the government of Afghanistan, and we control every dime of that money. When we talk about doing on-budget assistance, that's when, as Mr. Johnson referred to, we're giving money to a multi-donor trust fund that's administered by the World Bank. And within that trust fund, there is a small window of funds called recurrent costs, which do go to the government of Afghanistan to meet salaries. But every step of that is still audited by international auditors that our Inspector General has approved. So I refute the notion that we give money to the government of Afghanistan.
I just went through this with USAID. With the Kabul Bank situation, nearly $1 billion in missing funds. When I went to Afghanistan and sat in the room and I asked those people how much of that is U.S. money, they said, we had no idea. When we just give it to the Afghan government, we have no more accountability. It's hands off. We can't even tell you. I mean, when I went to Afghanistan, there was a time I just asked for a simple spreadsheet of the schools that we'd helped for. USAID couldn't even provide me a spreadsheet of those. Now, later they followed up and gave us some of those.
Yeah.
But You're telling me that there's no money, U.S. taxpayer money, going direct to the Afghan government?
Congressman, there may be some that goes through the World Bank Multi-Donor Trust Fund and through the recurrent cost window.
That is not the oversight that is happening here. We are not giving all this money to the World Bank. That is not how this is working.
No, Congressman, most of our money is done in direct assistance, and that is where USAID professionals work with the ministries of the 7 ministries I named on specific programs. So most of it is projectized money, but you asked me directly if we give money to the government of Afghanistan, and the only way that could be interpreted as happening is if it's done through the very carefully regulated World Bank Multi-Donor Trust Fund.
When it says in this report, quote, "Cigar found that USAID Afghanistan has only required the ministries to implement 24 of the 333 recommended risk mitigation measures prior to receiving funds," end quote. True or false?
True, Congressman, but inaccurate. The inaccuracy is we identified every possible weakness within these ministries, but our projectized risk, the risk to a particular project in the Ministry of Public Health, doesn't require all those risks to be mitigated at once. The conditions precedents, the things that we force them to fix now before we give them money, are risks that are specific and immediate to a particular project. And I'll note that we do address all the risk through a completely separate technical assistance goal. Our goal is to create ministries that do this themselves. And that's the reason that direct assistance is a valuable tool. But our first priority is safeguarding taxpayer resources, and so we don't put money into any of these ministries.
Well, we're going to go. I'm way past my time. I'll recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Tierney, the ranking member.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, does the Government Accountability Office have staff on the ground in Afghanistan?
Yes, we do.
And how important is their presence to the investigations of the programs and the policies in that country?
That presence, which the Congress has supported us, and we thank you for that support, has been extremely valuable. It gives us the firsthand, real-time experience and interaction with our colleagues who are there in the IG and oversight community, as well as with the agencies that we do oversight for you, whether it's DOD, State, and USAID. So that presence has been extremely valuable.
And how important is it that those individuals have access to documents that they believe are relevant to their investigations and audits?
That is extremely important to our work, and with respect to the work in Afghanistan, we've had a pretty good relationship with respect to our Afghanistan-related work.
So how open would you say the United States Agency of International Development has been to reviews of those documents by the General Accountability Office?
If the focus is on our Afghanistan oversight, we've had pretty good interaction with the folks at the mission with respect to our Afghanistan oversight.
So you've been allowed to review the documents, even documents that were marked sensitive but unclassified?
In some cases, and with respect to Afghanistan, that answer would be an affirmative answer.
You have been able to do that?
With respect to Afghanistan.
And with respect to where have you not had that kind of cooperation?
I think it's been somewhat not an access issue, but more so we've had experienced some challenges in terms of the processes we've had to go through to gain the ability, timely ability to review documents.
Can you explain that to me?
I guess basically there are some cases where we have to have our staff come over to a reading room in other areas to look at materials, and that's basically created more of a strain on our resources and been somewhat more costly.
So these are unclassified documents, but you've had your staff has had to be brought over to a facility and the work is done there?
Yes.
And whose policy is that?
This is actually within the USAID's policy.
And in practical terms, how does that affect the work that you're trying to do?
Well, as I was pointing out, most of the effect has to deal with a resource constraint. We see it as something that creates an additional cost for our resources.
Well, Mr. Sample, I'd be a little concerned if those types of policies are being used in any way at all for abusive purposes on this. I understand that sometimes it's necessary to have documents have some level of secrecy, but if you're going to be marking things that are sensitive but not classified, it seems that there could be a better policy worked out to allow access without causing such a strain on resources. What do you say?
Congressman, first, of course USAID does not in any way want to hamper the work of GAO or your committee, and it is our policy to share information that's required for those duties. when we mark information sensitive but unclassified, we provide always in-camera access to full unredacted documents in every case, as far as I'm aware.
Would you just make them spend extra resources getting over to take a look at them?
The problem, Congressman, is that in the generation of some of these documents, they include information that is sensitive. The example I've used in Afghanistan is some of the documents we created actually named members of oversight bodies, like your own, in the government of Afghanistan who are providing oversight of and trying to prevent Afghan fraud, waste, and abuse. Now, naming them in a public document would put them literally at risk of their life, and that's sensitive information. It's not classified because it doesn't do risk to the United States' national interest, but it is sensitive.
I don't think it's anybody's surprise who the members of this panel are, and that we're doing this kind of work. I mean, I'm concerned because when Mr. Sopko went over there and was working the same issue, he reported back that he was coming into some of the same restrictions on that, and that when he asked for an explanation of it, he was told that the documents could be disclosed except that they'd be found to be embarrassing. Now, I don't think that you drafted the policy for sure, but you may be stuck with trying to implement it from time to time. Have you come across any of those situations where things were not disclosed primarily just because they'd be embarrassing if they were, as opposed to being so sensitive for security reasons?
No, Congressman. We would not hold documents back, and we have not, to my knowledge, redacted documents because of that. The issue that you're describing with the Special Inspector General may well have an impact, however, on the next round of engagements with the government of Afghanistan. They opened all their books to us in an unprecedented level of access to do a collaborative assessment of risk in their ministries, expecting that those would be kept internal to the U.S. government. They have since not been kept internal to the U.S. government. The redactions are to protect personal interests and individuals, and in a couple of cases to protect against the revealing vulnerabilities in Afghan systems that would indeed open them up to exactly the kind of exploitation that we're trying to avoid and train them not to do.
Well, look, I have some sympathy for the sensitivity issue with respect to the Afghan officials, but I have no sensitivity to them not opening their books fully, in order for us to review and audit whether or not they're spending the money that the United States appropriates wisely. So obviously there's a question of a balance there on that we have to strike on that basis. But I'd like to see some effort be made to lighten the burden on personnel that the General Accountability Office and the Inspector General have in getting access to those documents so that it doesn't become onerous, and a sort of a stepped-up effort to make sure that there really is a national security issue on sensitivity on that before any kind of restrictions put on them at all. If I can just for 1 second on that, just finish out this. So recently there was a proposal, USAID office, a proposal to hire photographers in Afghanistan, and the express purpose, I'm told, was, and I quote, to counter negative visual images coming from Afghanistan with high-quality positive images. To the extent possible, can you explain the reason behind that original proposal?
Yeah, certainly, Congressman. Our staff work is not always as good as it should be before it's released to the public. I'll just be candid. If I had seen that, I would not have released it to the public as it was written. The staff in Afghanistan are passionate about the work that they do. And by the time newspaper reports in Washington get put up on the Internet and go back to Kabul, the real experience our staff have on the ground with what's reported in the international media just doesn't sync. They have a cognitive dissonance between what they're doing and what they see with their own eyes and then what they see reported in the international press. Now, our staff, I personally push aggressively from my time as in private practice to encourage every staff member to collect stories and pictures and opportunities to talk about and demonstrate the effects of the good work that's being done. But the quality of what we collect ourselves is not that good. Our cell phone photographs and our selfies that are taken in the field don't tell the story adequately well. So the intent of this was merely to capture positive news stories in Afghanistan that we know are there and make them available for people who wish to see them. It was not an attempt to propagandize. It was not an attempt, to gain or to counter negative stories. It was, though, an attempt, and in my opinion, a poorly executed but well-intended attempt to tell the good news stories of the work that USAID, the U.S. government, and indeed all the donors are doing in Afghanistan.
Well, when you use an expression like counter negative visual images, it sort of flows against what you're trying to tell us here on that. So at least the most unfortunate use of language, if nothing else, and I assume that now that the project's been canceled and there's been some attention brought to the matter, that's a lesson learned for folks. I think most of us are never happy with the press and the visual and verbal images that they project on the time when they fly by and write a story and go off into the sunset. but I don't think it gives us license to try and create our own stories on that. So
No, I agree,
appreciate your
Congressman.
remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Micah, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me. Well, a couple of things. Let me go first to Mr. Sampler. Got this amount, $102 billion U.S. assistance and aid, non-military, since 2002, is it? Is that correct?
It is, Congressman, excuse me, depending on how you parse the money. As was previously noted, a large percentage, over half of that, was in fact used for development and assistance to the military. It was
How much is their annual budget now? I have a $7.5 billion. That's the federal budget for Afghanistan.
I think that's right, but I can't confirm that.
And my calculation is that we've been pouring an average of about $10 billion in economic aid, not counting military aid. Is that a ballpark figure?
Congressman, I'm not sure what you asked. I'm sorry.
Well, it's about $10 billion in economic aid a year over that period, maybe 9 or something.
I'm sorry, development
On
assistance,
average,
yes.
so that my point is that the average aid, non-military, exceeds their annual budget. That would be correct. It's got to be more than the 7.5. Now, we had, Chairman cited that we had a hearing here with the Special Inspector General, and he sat right in that chair. I almost fell off my chair when he said, there's $20 billion right now in economic aid that the Afghans have neither the capacity to absorb or ability to spend or steal. And when I got to question him a second time, I said, did I hear you say capacity to spend or steal? And I think he confirmed that was the case. Do you believe that also to be the case?
Congressman, we're working aggressively to increase their capacity to spend that money and decrease their capacity to steal it.
But his review was quite critical, that the level of corruption is extremely high. Now, you go after people who misuse your money too, AID money, and AID, I guess you've administered about 47% of that, and other. Is that the rest? Does that include the money going through NGOs, or is the 53% given to other international organizations?
Congressman, some goes through local and international NGOs, and our money is aggressively pursued and overseen.
Has there been any case in which the United States has pursued people who have misused our dollars that you could cite?
There have been programs that we shut down because they were not performing.
Have we had the ability, it is within another jurisdiction, to go after them, or have the Afghanis prosecuted anyone for corruption, fraud, or abuse of that aid?
The first question, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if we've actually...
Can you provide it to the committee for...
We can.
Okay.
We can. Yes, sir.
To your knowledge, has anyone been prosecuted for misusing U.S. dollars?
In Afghanistan?
Yeah.
Well, we actually arrested a USAID staff member in Afghanistan who our own Inspector General had investigated.
You can testify that some of our people have done wrong. Any Afghanis or any other folks that we know of that we've gone after? It sounds like we've lost billions to corruption as high as the President's office and family. And again, when I went over there, Mr. Chaffetz had been over there and cited that. I remember pointing out, I went to a forward operating position in one of the villages, and the troops point out, see that school over there? We constructed it. He says, that's the village joke, because we paid 5 or 10 times what it should cost to build that. Are you aware that kind of misuse of our hard-earned taxpayer dollars has gone on, continues to go on?
Congressman, let me answer your first point first about billions of dollars in corruption. I will state categorically, USAID has not lost billions of dollars to corruption in Afghanistan. To your point of a specific school in a specific
Well, then it would be to overpayment and misuse, waste.
Congressman, I cannot honestly categorically say there have not been overpayments. Doing reconstruction and development in a war zone is a challenge. Our guidance, our rules don't allow for it. When we find it, we pursue it.
If I wanted to stop the aid, what do I have to go through? Which budget? Would that be state? Most of this AID money is coming through the state.
From the foreign operation, yes, Congressman.
So that's where I've got to target it.
Congressman, I'm not certain of the process.
I just want you to help me because I want to cut it off. But you may not be inclined to cooperate other than providing me with the assurance that if I cut it off there, we'll be able to stop some of the waste and abuse. My time's up, but I've got lots more questions, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to submit and get follow-up responses, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. All members' questions within the time frame will be submitted, and we would appreciate both of you, Mr. Johnson and Mr. Sampler, to help us in a timely way getting answers to those questions. So duly noted for Mr. Micah. We'll now recognize the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Spear, for 5. Oh, are we going to recognize?
I believe Mr. Welch is next.
Mr. Welch, my apologies. We're now recognized for 5 minutes.
It's okay. Thank you very much. I agree with the statement, Mr. Chaffetz, your opening statement, and Mr. Tierney, your opening statement. And I really appreciate the fact that you're having this hearing at this time, and I think the whole committee does. It's really refreshing for me to be part of a constructive oversight operation. You're here, but you didn't. We've got a problem that you didn't cause. I mean, to a significant degree, Congress has been complicit in this. We've got a situation now in Afghanistan where obviously it's in our interest for them to maintain the gains that have been made. It's in our interest for Afghanistan to have maximum stability. But having said those are our interests, does it mean that if we continue pumping money into a country that has institutionalized corruption, weak institutions, in a revenue system that's basically non-existent, we can have any confidence whatsoever that that money will achieve the goals of maintaining gains or stability? I mean, that's really my question. I would not have a problem sending resources to Afghanistan if I had the slightest bit of confidence that it would actually work. And, you know, you've laid out a number of the steps that you've tried to take in order to maintain some accountability and transparency, but it seems to me a problem. And that is, no matter what steps you take, no matter how much you try to stay ahead of the game, if you have a government that will not even establish a revenue system that basically says, hey, 3% of our revenues will come from what we collect, and 97% will come from foreign aid, and then that foreign aid has, I think everybody knows, been used basically as a source of funding the private lives and an institutionalized system of corruption rather than building up institutions. I think it makes it hard for on both sides of the aisle to be confident that even if we share the goal that you're trying to achieve, sending the money is going to get the job done. So my question is this: given that skepticism, which I think is widely shared, what are some specific concrete things that we could do that are easy to understand, easy to monitor, that would guarantee that the money delivered was not stolen? And that's number one. And number two, should there be some preconditions, like, for instance, that the Afghanistan government establishes a revenue system whereby they've got some skin in the game before we're just sending checks that we're not confident are going to be used? So I ask, that's a kind of a long question, but I think it states the dilemma that we're in. And start with you, Mr. Sampler.
Congressman, I appreciate your skepticism. I make it a point once a month to try and get outside the Beltway and talk to business organizations, and I get exactly the same skepticism from ordinary Americans. And I think it's important that we be reminded that the people providing us these resources are skeptical. The first point I'll make in terms of assuring success is that the money we've invested thus far has produced spectacular development returns. And I use those words advisedly. They truly are, in the realm of development, spectacular returns in the area of health, education, infrastructure, and even in the area of building governance. In 2002, there was not an intact building anywhere in Kabul. There were no ministries in 2002. Next month, in less than 30 days, we'll have an election in Afghanistan where a democratically elected government will pass the reins of power to another democratically elected administration, we hope. I think you're right to look for preconditions. I think at this point in time, this government is in a less than advantageous position to impose them. But I know from working with the ministers, the technocrats who've been selected to lead the government, that they do understand both the skepticism in the parliaments and in the populations of the donor countries, and the requirement that they begin to show that they do have skin in the game and that they are interested in weaning themselves off of donor dependency. With respect to specific measures, I wish I could say that there are simple things that we can do, and there are some, but they get very complicated quickly as we begin to explain them. If this were particularly risk-free and particularly easy and direct to do, I would expect us to pass this to the private sector. That's what they do. What we do is work in situations where the risk cannot always be eliminated. But you ask for specific things. With respect to projectizing money, that's probably the principal way we assure that the admittedly corrupt government of Afghanistan does not in turn corrupt our programs. We projectize money, we do not give money to the government. We control the bank accounts. In these projects, we insist that they set up a separate, non-commingled bank account that USAID has control of and oversight over. If the money is being paid out to a ministry as they achieve a milestone, then we verify the achievement of that milestone, and we do it through various and multiple data collection methods. It may be technological through satellite imagery. It may be crowdsourcing where we talk to the recipients of the program. It may be self-reporting from the government or self-reporting from a partner. But we take multiple inputs, and we have a unit that's been created at the embassy called the Institutional Support Unit that analyzes this data and renders a very dry and a very detached perspective of, is this data collection acceptable, and can we say they've met the milestone? If we can't, we don't pay. If they meet the milestone, we do. Separately, we may pay cost accruals, where they turn in receipts. But again, we validate those receipts through multiple external sources. So there's a number, I would argue an adequate number, of different kinds of mechanisms, counters and checks and balances in place. They haven't been reported in the Special Inspector General reports, but they are there, and hopefully a future Inspector General report will examine those as well.
Thank you. Thank the gentleman. To suggest that they're trying to wean themselves off of foreign assistance defies logic. They're not doing anything like that. And we're spending more money there than ever. We're increasing the spending there. We're not decreasing it. Why would they do it? Why would they wean themselves off of this money when we just give it to them for free? That's a ridiculous assertion. You should be ashamed for making that comment. Now I recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Duncan, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I don't have any questions, but I do want to make a statement. And I have no criticism of Mr. Sampler or the Agency for International Development, but because I'm sure they're doing the best they can with what the assignment that they've been given. But I will criticize the policy because I think it's totally crazy what we're doing over there in regard to particularly the amount of money that we're spending. This is my 26th year in the Congress. When I first came here, our national debt was less than $3 trillion. I thought that was terrible. But we've lost sight up here of how much money $1 trillion is. We can't even comprehend anything like that yet. Now we're over $17 trillion in debt, and they say we're going to double that in another 8 or 9 years. Yet we're sending all this money down a rat hole in Afghanistan. And I've been given several articles here. One from the Huffington Post. It says, as Afghanistan drawdown looms, Inspector General warns of graft. And it says he's watching the country slip away, and he's quoted as saying, every time I visit, I'm told by people that we are succeeding, says John Sopko, and he's been here to testify in front of us several times. I'm not an expert on warfighting, but I know I can see less of the country every time I go because of security problems. And then there's an article from some publication called The Interpreter. It says, foreign aid is Afghanistan a welfare state? Well, I voted for the go to war in Afghanistan, but I sure didn't vote for a forever war or a permanent war or to turn Afghanistan into a welfare state. And that's what we've done. This is a country that had a GDP of $21 billion before we went in there. And now, according to the World Affairs Journal, there's an article here that says Money Pit, the monstrous failure of USAID to Afghanistan. And it says in this article, it says, in a recent quarterly report, the U.S. Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction said that when security for aid workers is figured in, the total amount of non-military funds Washington has appropriated since 2002 is approximately $100 billion. Now that's, you know, it's unbelievable what we've spent militarily, but $100 billion, and that was a figure last July, and it says since then Congress has appropriated another $16.5 billion for reconstruction. And it says in this article, it says, what has all this spending accomplished? Quote, the short answer is not so much, said Masood Farvar, a senior Afghan journalist. And it says, or as the International Crisis Group put it, quote, despite billions of dollars in aid, state institutions remain fragile and unable to provide good governance, deliver basic services to the majority of the population, or guarantee human security. And lastly, Heather Barr of the Human Rights Watch said, and she's apparently, it says, a longtime representative in Afghanistan, said Afghanistan in many ways is sort of a perfect case study of how not to give aid. And you know, when we're borrowing 42% or whatever it is of every penny that we spend, it's just ridiculous to think that we've spent this much money over there. Our Constitution doesn't give us the authority or the right to run another country and do everything imaginable for them. I mean, I'm for trade and tourism and cultural and educational exchanges and helping out to a very limited extent during humanitarian crises. But I'll say again, it's just ridiculous. It is just crazy for us to spend this much money that we don't have, because it is long past the time when we need to start we start putting our own country and our own people first once again, and stop trying to do all this that we're doing over in Afghanistan. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Appreciate that. We'll now recognize the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Spear, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And to Mr. Sampler and Mr. Johnson, thank you both for your service to our country and for the leadership that you have shown. I think what you're feeling here on this dais is that we believe that USAID has a purpose. And around the world, when we create this soft money to go into countries and to help people build their infrastructure and their economic prowess, we do it expecting that it's going to work. We spent a lot of money in Iraq, maybe not as much as we spent in Afghanistan, and then they kicked us out. And Mr. Sampler, you would agree that that money is basically down the tubes, right?
No, ma'am, not categorically, I wouldn't. I mean, the development good that was done in Afghanistan is a lasting good. Children that were fed, schools that were built. So development money is development money. So I don't categorically agree that that money is lost because of a political schism between us and Iraq. The development good that we did in Iraq has lasting effects. I haven't done Iraq, but in general, I don't believe that just because we're not still there doesn't mean that the good we did was lost.
How much money did we spend on this spin doctor?
I'm sorry, ma'am, I don't understand.
Mr. Tierney had queried you about the position that was created. How much?
We never hired that position.
Well, how much were you slated to spend on it?
I don't know the answer to that.
Would you find out and return
Yes,
that
ma'am.
information to the committee so we know what the priority was there? In 2010, President Karzai said we could no longer rely on contractors to provide security for our convoys and the people that we had there. and that we had to rely on the Afghan Public Protection Force. Now President Karzai is reporting that he is disbanding the APPF. So I think we're all very concerned up here that we not have another Benghazi, that we don't lose members who are providing services for USAID or from the State Department. How are we providing security for our facilities and our personnel there?
Yes, ma'am. No one shares your concern about the safety of our staff more than I do. A point of fact, though, a clarification. APPF, as you noted, was decreed by President Karzai in 2010. APPF, however, does not provide security for diplomatic enclaves. So U.S. government direct hires, my staff and the State Department
All right,
staff.
let's talk about the people that aren't your staff.
Okay. Partners, Médecins Sans Frontières, for-profit partners who work for us in Afghanistan. If they wish to have armed guards, they must be hired through APPF by Afghan law. At the time of APPF's creation, only about 20% of our partners actually used armed guards. So 20% of our partners were required to enter contractual agreements with the state-owned enterprise known as APPF for their guards.
Okay, I already said that. I want to get to your answer. What's happening now that Karzai is no longer going to have APPF, is disbanding APPF?
Yes, ma'am. It's an internal Afghan government discussion. It's ongoing. The most recent diplomatic engagement with the Minister of Interior, Daudzai, he assured us that there would be no interruption of services being provided by APPF to our partners. He provides static security and convoy security, the latter primarily for the military. But Daudzai made a very clear statement to senior U.S. government officials because we asked him very pointedly these questions, and he said there would not be an interruption of service.
Well, if the APPF is being disbanded, who is going to provide the security?
I think, again, the context is that Afghanistan is facing a presidential election in less than a month. There's a fair amount of confusion inside the Afghan government about what they're going to do, which is why we went to the minister for his assurance. I think there is an expectation on the part of some that APPF will be absorbed back into the Ministry of Interior and to the Afghan Uniformed Police Service.
So we don't know, but we're relying on a minister within the government who may or may not be there after the election.
Ma'am, in all candor,
and maybe
in
you
most
can't do
countries,
any more
that's all
than
we
that.
have.
And maybe you can't do more than that. But I think I just want a straight answer. I think the committee deserves a straight answer, and we need to have our eyes wide open in terms of what kind of protection or lack of protection is there for those who we are engaged in having us provide assistance to the Afghan people. You said that there's no funds that go directly to the government and that you control these funds. So if I understand you correctly, you have money that is going to a NGO or someone providing services who's a for-profit. You put the money in a bank, a central bank in Afghanistan, and withdrawals are only made by you. Is that correct?
The withdrawals are authorized by USAID. Yes, ma'am.
Well, do you make an authorization of, $20 million or $4,000 because that's what the invoice is for?
It depends on the program, ma'am. In every case, we're either paying for reaching a milestone, in which case we externally validate that they reached the milestone, and then we pay them what we agreed for that, or we're paying for the accrual of expenses, in which case they submitted batches of receipts, and we in turn audit the receipts and externally validate that the receipts are good. But in either case, we validate what we're paying for before we pay it, and then we validate that the check actually went to the person or the organization that performed the services.
And how do you validate that?
We ask them.
So you call them up on the phone and say, did you actually get this check?
We can in some cases. There are there are different ways that we can do that. But yes, ma'am, we actually do. Most of the NGOs that do this work, in public health, for example, are NGOs that are known to us. We've been in Afghanistan now for a dozen years, and some of these NGOs have been there for 40 or 50 years. So when the Ministry of Public Health, with our oversight and permission, engages a particular NGO to do a health clinic, we know the people that run that clinic, and we know that NGO, and we're able to ask the clinic, did you get the resources? Did you get the $12,627 that you asked for?
All right. Mr. Chairman, my time has expired, but I still have an abiding question as to how $1 billion in funds at the Kabul Bank got distributed to a group of 18 individuals, and we don't know why or how, and we're presuming this money was not U.S. money, which is what I guess everyone's presuming.
And I think the point there, if the gentlewoman will yield, is that there was a significant amount of U.S. money. Part of this went to Karzai's brother. He's listed as one of the people who's taking this money. And the excuse that we get from USAID is, well, once we give it to the government, it's hands off. We don't get to see it anymore. We don't. That's their business, not our business. And there have been external reports done on this. This is one of those big concerns. And I would point also to the gentlewoman, back in September, there was a criticism from the cigar focused on a $236 million USAID program called Partnership Contracts for Health. In fairness, the USAID denied that they were giving money directly to the government, but cigar said that there was I don't want to put words in their mouth, but it obviously caused them great concern. So this is why we have a special inspector general. They get to go in and be objective. And they don't come back with glowing reports. So let me recognize the gentlewoman from Wyoming who's been waiting patiently, Ms. Lummis, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sampler, I want to go back to a response you made to Mr. Mica and ask you to elaborate a little. What did you mean by increasing the Afghan capacity to spend our money?
Yes, ma'am. There are multiple ways to achieve development objectives in Afghanistan. If it's, again, health, to use that example, if the goal is to inoculate children, we can do this directly through NGOs very effectively. But that doesn't get us out of the business of supporting Afghanistan, and it doesn't reduce their donor dependency.
Why not? Why not?
Because we're doing the work ourselves rather than teaching the government of Afghanistan how to do it. It's complicated, and it requires mentoring. So when I say increasing their ability to spend our money, the government of Afghanistan ministries have underperformed over the past few years with respect to budget execution. Money that they have in their budgets and that the government of Afghanistan, in their fledgling attempts to allocate budgets and resources, they haven't been able to spend it.
Okay, now, Mr. Sampler, I'm going to interrupt you just because I have to go to my constituents, and when they find out that we're giving money for aid in Afghanistan, and these are people in my state who have been to the Pine Ridge, South Dakota, Oglala Sioux Reservation. Some of them have been to Chicago or Detroit, since it's gone bankrupt and whole buildings are being occupied by people with drug problems, and the communities are deteriorating in this country. They've seen the grinding poverty among some Shoshone and Arapaho on the Wind River Indian Reservation in Wyoming and elsewhere. How can I tell them that we're working so hard to increase the capacity of the Afghan government to spend our money when the response I'm going to get is, why would we increase the Afghan government's capacity, a government that you acknowledge is untrustworthy and corrupt, when we have uses here in this country where there is grinding poverty right before our eyes in American cities or on American Indian reservations? I'm having trouble answering that question. So help me answer that question. Yes, assume that I'm your constituent.
Yes, ma'am.
And you have to respond.
I go out every chance I get back to my home state of Georgia and have exactly these conversations with businessmen at home, to include my dad. And the challenge is, if we don't do it right in Afghanistan, we may find ourselves having to do it again in another 12 years. Someone has to secure the space of Afghanistan. It is an incredibly wild country.
It is. I've been there. I've been there with the gentleman from Vermont at the end of the table. And we were out in Kandahar province, and we saw the U.S. had rebuilt the third holiest site, of the Muslim site in Afghanistan in a remote area in Kandahar province, because their own people in a civil war had destroyed their own religion's third holiest site. So we go and rebuild it, and then we've got Army Ranger Special Ops people out there, Americans, trying to defend it from being destroyed again by Muslims in their own country. It just defies logic to me that that's how we're spending our money. Try to help me explain that.
Yes, ma'am. The question of corruption is one that I think deserves a lot of attention. It is perhaps the single greatest challenge that we're facing. And the point that I make when I go out to speak to constituents is that, in my opinion, in developmental theory, the best way to combat corruption is strong institutions. Again, in 2002, there were not even strong, solid buildings, never mind strong, solid institutions. The work that we're doing with the government of Afghanistan is intended to build institutions that will help them fight corruption themselves. It is not something we can fix overnight, but it is something that we are determined to fix.
Do you think a corrupt government can be taught to be honest?
I'm not sure if I would answer it that way. I would instead let me offer this. On your next trip out, meet with the ministers and the people they set up, but also ask to meet with some of the young Afghans. The ministries now are populated by Afghans from 25 to 35 years old, and they don't have to be taught to be honest. In my opinion, the vast majority of them, they're patriotic because they could be working for me at the U.S. Embassy. They're college educated, they've been abroad, but they come back and choose to work in their ministries for a lower salary because they want Afghanistan to succeed. They don't have to be taught to be honest. They don't have to be taught to be patriotic. They just need a chance.
Thanks, Mr. Sampler. My time is up, and I yield back. Mr. Chairman, thanks for your indulgence.
Thank the gentlewoman. I'll now recognize the gentlewoman, Ms. Maloney, for 5 minutes.
Chairman, and are either of you spending much time in Afghanistan? Are you there? Are you up here? Where's your offices?
The GAO does have permanent presence in Afghanistan. Actually, I have 3 members behind me who actually have staffed that presence for about 6 months each, and we currently have a staff of 6 people, 3 people there for 6 months. I've made multiple visits to Afghanistan as well as Pakistan, just across the border.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Mr. Sampler? Have you spent much time there?
Yes, ma'am. I go about every 60 days. I expect to go at the end of the month. I lived there for about 3 or 4 years.
Are you hopeful? Are we making progress there?
That's a great question, and thank you for asking it. In some areas, we absolutely are. In other areas, we're facing still difficult challenges, but I'm cautiously optimistic.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think many of our concerns, and I want to echo my colleague on the other side of the aisle, we agree on a lot of things in women's rights, and we agree on this, that it's hard to finance an area that is so disgustingly corrupt. And it's just again and again and again and again. And probably the biggest example was the Kabul Bank, which was once Afghanistan's largest private bank. But by the time it reached near collapse in 2010, the Kabul Bank had been looted by $935 million, primarily by 19 individuals and companies, including the bank's ex-CEO. These 2 figures only received 5 years in prison, and they're now appealing it. So when you see that type of action, I'm concerned about USAID's bank accounts over in Kabul. Do you feel like your money's secure over there?
Yes, ma'am. Kabul Bank has come up a couple of times, so let me just make a couple of points. We lost no U.S. tax dollars in Kabul Bank. We did not have any money in that bank. USAID did not have any money in that bank.
But we do now, don't we?
We do not. We have a relationship with the Kabul Central Bank, which would be analogous to our Federal Reserve. Kabul Bank would be perhaps a state bank in one of the states. Kabul Bank was an Afghan-on-Afghan crime, and our outrage is shared and exceeded, perhaps, by the Afghan depositors who lost their savings. We are still, in fact, working with the government of Afghanistan to pursue the culprits who were associated with the Kabul Bank fiasco.
Well, we're facing the same challenge, really, in over in Ukraine, where it's been reported that $88 billion is missing from the prior government. And we are getting ready to send $1 billion over of uncapped aid So the question really is, what safeguards do we have that our money actually gets to the people and the causes that we want? In terms of the Ukraine, reported in the press is that they, even IMF loan guarantees, the loan guarantee money came in, they immediately took $23 billion and sent it offshore. So so how can we really make sure that it's going for the purposes that we want to help in Afghanistan, Ukraine, or anywhere?
Yes, ma'am. The situation in the Ukraine is different, and I can't really speak to that. Okay. But in Afghanistan, we projectize our money. USAID money that goes to Afghanistan does not go to the government of Afghanistan, but we work with a particular ministry or a particular office in that ministry to achieve a particular project. And then we identify either milestones that must be accomplished for particular payments or accrual of payments. And we
I want to mention contracts because historically our private sector and public sector are very strong when they work together. And when contracts were offered in Afghanistan to the private sector, what I heard, it was impossible for an American company to ever win one because we didn't bribe and we weren't corrupt. One of my constituents told me he bid on a copper plan, a copper mine, managing it. His RFP, or his proposal, ended up in a competitor's hands that then won the contract. The competitor then did not even know what to do with the copper mine and came back and tried to hire him. So when you see this type of corruption, which I think is very short-sighted on behalf of the Afghan government, if they had allowed American business to be fairly treated, then they would be there helping the country. But what happened is an American business could never win a contract, and then our servicemen and women had to risk their lives protecting contractors that came in from other countries who hadn't invested a dime in helping the country. So something's very wrong with that equation, and I really am disturbed by it.
Yes, ma'am. On the issue of tenders, if the Afghans, when the Afghans are able to capitalize on the mineral wealth, I think it will be a good day for Afghanistan. We are working aggressively with the Ministry of Mines and Petroleum, which is the ministry here in question, I believe, to make sure that they have a capacity to do business in ways that Western organizations understand. That has not been the tradition for decades, if not centuries. It has been a very patriarchal society and a very...
But Mr. Sampler, what I'd like to point out is we spent billions in treasure and life,
yes, ma'am,
and commitment, and then this country, what I was told by American businessmen, they were incapable of ever fairly winning a contract. Their applications were given to their competitors. I know American businessmen who run around the world giving speeches against investing in Afghanistan. So the stupidity of the country, but also the stupidity of our country, in that we are financing everything and protecting foreign investors who bribed and got the contracts, and yet American businessmen and women were not successful. And, what can we do to allow American businessmen and women to have a fair shot at a contract in Afghanistan? I guess now they don't even want to try. But I think going forward in other areas that we're involved, we were not only paying the bill, protecting everybody, losing American lives, spending $1 trillion a day or whatever it was, but other countries came in and benefited from everything that we did, yet American business and investment could not. Now, there's something very wrong with that equation.
Yes, ma'am. The goal...
It's not a winning strategy, to say the least.
The goal will be institutions in Afghanistan that are transparent and educated, capable, and competent, and we're not there yet.
Okay.
Thank the gentlewoman. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Johnson, I want to go back about the idea, talk about is the U.S. government contributing and funding payments to the Afghan government? You issued a report in 2011. What is your perspective on this?
Congressman, Chairman, if you're referring to our report on the direct assistance, we did find situations where the U.S. government and USAID as well as DOD were providing money through the trust funds. And that's the Afghan Reconstruction Trust Fund, which Mr. Sampler noted would be sort of an on-budget type of assistance that the Afghan government could have somewhat some say-so and control in, as well as through LAFTA, which DOD managed. So there was quite a bit of money that was going through that route.
So you wrote in this report, quote, "The United States and other donors funded about 90% of Afghans' estimated total public expenditures from solar years 2006 to 2011. Of the 90%, the United States provided 62% of total expenditures." Is that correct?
The U.S. has been the predominant funder of expenditures. I would note that the bulk of our expenditures were in the security sector. We were close to about 40%, though. We were the largest contributor for the non-security sector as well. But altogether, there was the international community contributed slightly more in a cumulative if you add it all up. But we were a quite substantial contributor, as was noted.
So another way of saying it is of the public expenditures by the Afghan government, they collect, the Afghans only collect about 10%, a very rough number, about 10% of what they are able to spend, correct?
The bulk of the money at the time was off budget, so they didn't really have visibility into the funding until the decision was made to go more direct assistance, and then there began to be an increase in the amount of money to enable the Afghan government to do two things: to fund their local operations as well as pay their own salaries through the direct assistance route and build their capacity. The issue we had when we sort of not cautioned against it, but highlighted there needs to be controls in place before you try to do the two things at the same time. And that's where I talked about doing pre-award risk assessments and more so mitigating against the risk you've identified, which we've seen happen in other parts of the world, across the border in Pakistan, for example. Similar situation, pretty much where we were trying to go the direct assistance route. But in those situations, we found they would actually embed it in the contract, cooperative agreement, bilateral agreements, as well as embed folks in the ministries to ensure there was accountability of our funds.
So to suggest that the U.S. government does not give money directly to the Afghan government, how would you react to that?
I would say that's not totally true, that money has not gone directly to the Afghan government for them to have on budget to expend.
Here, let me frame this issue. I want to come back to this because, Mr. Sampler, you go way out of your way to try to suggest to us that none of the U.S. taxpayer money is going to the Afghan government.
If I look, Congressman, USAID does not give money directly to the U.S. government.
To the Afghan government?
I'm sorry.
You said U.S. government.
I apologize.
To the Afghan government.
Let me restate it. USAID does not give money directly to the Afghan government. That was what I meant to say, and I hope I've said it consistently.
Yeah, you have. I have great concern about that statement, but we'll have to continue to sort that out. You said at one point, we control the bank accounts. Explain that to me, and I want to set the context here. We're going to be spending more money than ever. Our troop levels are coming down. We're going to have less security in place to actually do the verification and to get out in the field and go see these types of things. Those things just don't add up. They're going in the wrong directions. I mean, it was bad before. When I was there and we were at near our peak of when we had the number of troops on the ground that we could protect our people, they still complained in their offices that they couldn't go out and see these projects. When I was there, they couldn't let me go out and see these projects. I asked to go see them. I couldn't get out there and go see them. When I talked to the inspectors, they couldn't get out into the field everywhere that they wanted to go. And when I talked to the USAID people, who are just great, brave, patriotic people in the most difficult of situations, they said, we can't get out and see these projects. How is that getting better? It seems like it's going to get worse.
Yeah, Congressman, this is a problem that's been coming for some time. I mean, PRTs did not, they've been closing PRTs for 2 years now, and in fact, they're mostly gone. So this isn't something that we're suddenly waking up and realizing we need new mechanisms for monitoring programs. What we've done is building on expertise in Pakistan, 12 years in Afghanistan. I've personally worked in both Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, Colombia, West Bank, Gaza, places where we have had to supervise programs, and yet we cannot, on a regular, predictable basis, put U.S. direct hire boots on the ground. We've developed alternative mechanisms that I will argue are good. The lessons learned from Iraq on this is don't rely on one source of information. Do rely on local communities because they're the beneficiaries of these, and if it's not right, they'll tell you. Focus on finding ways that are technologically innovative and different to validate programs. So it's not that we have a way to fix these things. We have a new office, the Institutional Support Unit, who are responsible for, in a very cold and deliberate way, analyzing all the inputs about a particular program and saying, does this meet our requirement? If it meets the requirement, then we'll make a decision. If it doesn't meet the requirement, then we suspend or terminate the program.
Mr. Johnson, your ability, the ability of the cigar to get out and be able to actually see and verify. I mean, there are reports after reports after reports of mismanagement of funds, overpaying funds. There was one, we were paying $500 a gallon for fuel. I mean, when you go out and spend $100 billion, there's going to be some waste, fraud, and abuse. It's just inevitable, particularly in the difficult circumstances that are Afghanistan. I don't expect it to be perfect, but I do expect that we get better at this. And what the disconnect for me is we're spending more money with less personnel and less safety and security. There's no doubt a lot of good that USAID has done and will do in the future. But how in the world are we possibly going to oversee the proper expenditure of $20 billion in this type of atmosphere?
Yeah, that is definitely something that's going to challenge all U.S. agencies, including USAID and the oversight community, with the withdrawal of the combat troops and then any other security forces if that's not mitigated in advance. I think that's something we all have to plan for.
Well, but what do you see from your objective point of view? What do you were they even achieving that before when we had the maximum amount of security?
It was definitely a challenging environment for us to do oversight as well as for the agencies to carry out their mission. I think there are other examples, other models, as Mr. Sampler alluded to. If we can't go out directly and oversee the projects ourselves, there's other means by which you can mitigate those things, using global imaging systems, things of that nature. Not just relying on your NGOs and your implementing partners to bring you data and provide progress reports, but also, using photographs, media reports, other things that you can use to validate what you're receiving from the folks you're giving money to carry out the program. So you need to have multiple ways of validating what you're getting from the folks you're paying.
No, and I agree. We've asked in previous instances to can we just see a photo of what we built? Can you provide a photo? Couldn't even do that.
Mr. Chairman, if I can just note, on some of the work we did on the other side of the border, we found that was being done. And even on the Afghan side, data was being collected by USAID. However, a lot of the data was not being retained or documented. And so that was part of the gap. So I think we made recommendations in that area. We were happy that later on we saw that those recommendations were addressed back then and that things were done to document it. We have not looked at that issue in a couple of years with respect to documentation, but that was a weakness previously.
If you could, that would be great. I've gone way over time now. I recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Tierney.
Thank you. I mean, I think this last series of questions sort of got to the nub of it, what we're talking about on this. So the first determination is ours, the policy decision of the United States national security interest to continue giving aid to Afghanistan there or not there, right? And that's our issue, not yours on that. And from what I understand, the things that we're now providing money for through USAID are agriculture, governance, rule of law, trying to increase the economic growth of that country. So we have to determine that those missions are, in fact, in the United States interest sufficiently for national security interest that we want to keep putting money into that on that. And we have, at least to date, done that because there's money going out, and you're in charge, Mr. Sampler, of doing that. Let me say, people have been pretty pointed with you this afternoon. Whether people up here agree with what's happening out there or not, I hope you don't take it personal on that. And I want to tell you that you are and have been an excellent spokesman for your agency. We need people that believe in their mission. Some people up here may not think it's a good mission or bad mission or whatever, but it's something that government has asked you to do. And if they send you out there as somebody who's totally cynical and not doing it for the right reasons, then we're not being well served. And you, sir, I think are fully committed to what you're doing, and I want to thank you for it, and I appreciate it, and your staff that's with you as well. I think that know that. But it's our job to look at this and then say, well, fine, we've committed the money, so the next question is, how do we do it? How do we do it to bring us back some assurance that there's accountability, that the money just isn't going off into the ether somewhere? So we want to talk about the amount that we give, the manner in which it's given, how we account for it, and we want to document that it's been to the benefit of our country as well as the country that's on the receiving end of it. And that's what today's hearing has been about. And fundamentally, at the very end of it, we're sort of honing in. If we don't have security sufficient to take us to where these projects are, whether it's a far-flung agricultural project or even a rule of law issue in a remote province somewhere on that, how do we know it's happening? Or if we're building a school someplace, how do we know that it's functioning properly and that it's been constructed well? In Pakistan, we had one problem of having too few USAID people to actually monitor it even when they could get to a location. And so it turned out that what we discovered was we were oftentimes taking the recipient of the grant, a not-for-profit, and then asking them how do they do. And remarkably, they all thought they were doing pretty darn well. And so that obviously wasn't an effective way to do it. Mr. Johnson has now told us there are other methods that you're looking at. One of them is to take visual images on that. But I do have to say, we spoke a little bit earlier in the questioning about people on your staff taking visual images of things but not really having great images because of the technology that they were limited to in the process. But that's one of the very things that we're now going to count on to tell us that things are going well. So that's got some questions it raises right there, right?
Congressman, first of all, thank you for your kind comments. The photographs that we take with our cell phones are not meant to document. They're not meant to be documents of record.
So you have another kind of photograph that you're taking for proof of something happening in an area that you cannot physically get to.
And as an example, one of our monitoring partners has a set of cell phones that have very high digital resolution cameras and a built-in GPS and a date time stamp. So if they go out to take photographs of a school or photographs of another project, we not only know where they were and when they were there and what the photograph is of, but even which direction the camera is facing.
And this partner is a private partner, or
it's
is
a
it
private
an
contractor.
Afghan national, or who might it be?
It's an international private contractor who uses local Afghan subcontractors to do the work.
All right. And they've been vetted to our satisfaction, or are we just...
They have. I mean, we have a vetting program that's pretty aggressive, and they have been vetted before the contract was let.
All right. So, of course, the further part of that is one thing to build a structure, it's another thing to be able to complete the inside of it, staff it properly, and get a product out of it. So those things still remain a challenge, I would think. Mr. Johnson, once we build a school, how do we make sure that it's functioning? If we don't have security to go out there and physically do it, do we have a solution for that type of issue?
I think there have been situations, and again, some of this goes back to the security environment. If we build a school, but the security environment doesn't allow for it to be used, then that's an issue where, in advance, you should have, studied that. You made that determination before you invested the U.S. dollars. I think there have been a few situations where that may have occurred. But I think, getting back to an earlier point that was made that Mr. Sampler pointed out, and I'm quite pleased to hear sort of the imaging that is being taken. If there is some GPS tracking embedded, there's some date stamping, that's one of the things we felt like was needed when you have the evidence, but you need to document it better, that we see would, enhance the capability of USAID to show or have proof in its records. This all goes back to the knowledge transfer and having institutional knowledge. So I mentioned the turnover ratio that takes place. When the next person comes in, they'll have that evidence there and know how to build on that and use that to make future decisions.
The whole validation issue is a problem for us. I go back to Pakistan again only because we had some concrete examples there. In fact, I think the Inspector General's reports out of the whole Iraq process helped us with Iraq. I think some of our experiences in Pakistan help us look at this. But in Pakistan, where the premise early on was to give the money to the government and then take the receipts, and check the receipts, we were getting great receipts back. I was just telling the chairman here that we spent millions of dollars fixing 35 helicopters and had the receipts for them, and the money was approved and sent. When we went there on the ground and asked to be taken to those helicopters, the funny thing is none of them could fly on that. So I don't know how you get beyond that, but that's a concern that we have, is who's validating those receipts beyond just having an Afghan partner come up and say, here are the receipts, we really did this work. And how does that work?
Congressman, if I may, technology helps us, and I'll use the school example, because in developing countries, schools are often a way that a government is able to spread the largesse in ways that are not necessarily above board by ghost teachers or ghost schools. In Afghanistan, if we build a school and we wish to validate whether the school is functioning properly, we don't ask the Ministry of Education and we don't ask the teachers. We can ask the community. And again, that's why these independent monitoring contracts are valuable, because they can go and have a local shura meeting where they talk to the community and say, are you getting what you want from the school? If they're not, the community may not stand up and wave their arms and draw attention to themselves, calling out corruption within the Ministry of Education, but before the monitoring unit leaves town, very often they will pull them aside and say, they don't have 20 teachers at that school, they have 3. So we have SMS technology that we can use for things like that. We have independent contractors. And Mr. Chairman, to your point earlier, even if you gave me back 100,000 troops on the ground, the security situation would do what it's going to do, but I would still use the multiplicity of monitoring techniques that we've developed over all these countries and over all these years, because, again, one of the lessons from Iraq was do not depend on a single point of reporting. Require multiple reports, and then if there's discrepancies, find out where the discrepancy is. And that works independent of the number of international or U.S. troops on the ground. So that's the reason I have some level of confidence going forward that we're focusing on the right things. We haven't fixed all the problems yet, but we're focusing on the right things to fix them.
So thank you for that, Mr. Sampler. So we have a requirement that we have a separate bank account established for each project when we do it. Is that correct?
That's correct. We monitor the accounts and control the funds.
And are we depositing that United States assistance into the central bank?
Congressman, I don't think so. I think it goes into whichever commercial bank we've identified with that ministry will be the repository of those funds, much like an escrow account would be here in the States.
And so we do have actual physical oversight of that account. It's not a question of it going off to the central bank and then we're relying on an international organization with limited oversight capacity.
It is not. We do not have to go to the government of Afghanistan and ask to see our bank accounts.
Thank you. Do you want me to make a closing remark? You want to do yours? Yeah, go ahead. All right. So I'll just wrap up here again and just reiterate what I said about both of the gentlemen that are testifying here today and their staffs. We know you're committed and that you're out there and you're working very, very hard. We appreciate it. Our job is to keep this oversight up. Mr. Chairman, thank you for having this hearing again. As long as we make the policy decisions about having this kind of aid and assistance go out there, then it's our responsibility to have you oversee it and implement it, and our responsibility to make sure that you're doing that as much as we can. I think a lot of this is going to be, in the long run, as long as we decide to do that, whether or not it's working. What are the results? I guess there's no real system that we can set up that is pay for success, because some of this money has to be put out in order to get that success, but I do think we have to regularly and steadfastly oversee it and make periodic assessments as to whether or not this is risk worth taking and whether our national security interests are being furthered or not by that. So thank you, and thank you again, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I think I appreciate your ongoing concern about this issue. Let me just wrap up here. I want to hit just a couple of different things. I am concerned about the Automated Directive Systems, Chapter 593. This prevents the GAO from removing sensitive but unclassified materials from USAID's secure workspace facility, even if it's needed for official auditing purposes. We trust the GAO. They may be sensitive, but they are unclassified. We expect, I think, auditors to be able to have unfettered access. I don't know that that policy or directive is consistent with the law. We're going to go back and look at that. Do you does USAID provide classified materials to GAO?
Congressman, to the best of my knowledge, we do. I mean, again, to reiterate, we provide all the information that they ask for, that any of the oversight bodies ask for.
But I don't think that's true.
Not always in the form of a document that's actually released in an unredacted form. If there's a document they want,
we're not asking to release it. Auditors ought to be able to see whatever they want to see.
Absolutely.
But what you said is just in direct contradiction to that. It's just that, Mr. Johnson, is this the case? Explain to me what happens. When you want to see something that's sensitive but unclassified, what happens?
Well, I guess I would start by pointing out that this is not always the case. Generally, it happens in a few situations. We are required to come over to a reading room in some cases, and that does put a strain on our resources and becomes more costly for us, as well as USAID.
And the subjective nature of that, the inconsistency of that, it causes me concern. Even the documents that have been provided to the Congress have had redactions in them that I think were uncalled for. It's something we're not going to sort out in the last few minutes here. It's an ongoing concern. And Mr. Johnson, if there are any particular documents that you specifically need in your possession to do your job, and I'm saying that broadly for GAO, I would like to know about it if you can't resolve that directly with USAID. But the principle here is an important one. We're supposed to allow the auditors to come in and see what they want to see, particularly if documents, they may be sensitive, but they're unclassified. And I do have a problem if GAO or somebody was releasing information that's going to put somebody's bodily harm in their way. But this is not the only agency that they work and engage with. There are some pretty darn good, sophisticated policies over a host of agencies. It's not just USAID. I mean, they do this for every department and agency, essentially. So it's something that I would appreciate you working on, and we will pay attention to make sure that we're making progress on that. Number two, I do think, my ranking member here, Mr. Tierney, I do think it would be helpful to have Mr. Sopko come here as well as Mr. Shaw and do so together to talk about this broader context. It's something I look forward to doing, and we'll have to get on the calendar so we can appropriately schedule specific to Afghanistan, but also be able to talk maybe a little bit broader, certainly with Mr. Shaw. I find him to be very responsive when I've wanted to chat with him before, and I think it would be a healthy hearing, particularly as we talk about Afghanistan. We're talking about $100 billion that we've spent, so I look forward to doing that as well. And one thing that Mr. Tierney has persuaded me, I think, over the course of time here is the need for internal competency at USAID. We've got a lot of great, passionate people. Nobody's questioning your commitment to the mission here. We were chatting here, some other members asking questions. Mr. Sampler in particular, appreciate your passion for it. You can tell you believe in the mission and what you're doing, and I thank you for your military service as well as your service at USAID. But we can't just always rely on third-party vendors all the time. The mission of USAID is not, we can't just flip a switch on and off. Hopefully we're not engaged in prolonged, contracted military engagements over a long period of time, but there does need to be a bank of wisdom that we gain, and that we just don't go out and hire, let's go find another vendor. Because we should learn from Iraq. We have to learn from Afghanistan if we're going to do this better in other countries, in Africa, and all across the world. And I would join Mr. Tierney in the support of making sure that core competency is developed over a long period of time in a broad range of people. I think that pendulum swung one direction, and then it swung over here to say, oh, let's just contract it all out. But this is probably one agency where you need an internal core competency. One quick question, then we're done here. How many USAID personnel do we have in Afghanistan at this time?
Congressman, the last time I saw a formal report, it was 138. We will, by the end of this year, be down to between 100 and 110. And to put that in context, in 2012, I was up at 387. That's U.S. government direct hire U.S. employees.
And again, maybe you could get back to me on this, or maybe Mr. Shaw could help me answer this, Administrator Shaw. We're spending more money than we ever have before. We're drawing down not only the security personnel, but the people on the ground. If we're having roughly a third, right, of what we had at its peak.
Yeah.
I don't know what the proper ratio is, but we're going to spend $20 billion. My state of Utah, we spent about $13 billion in an entire year. We have 22,000 state employees. And here we're going to go spend $20 billion over, it's hard to tell what time period, and we've got just over 100 people trying to administer that. I just physically, I don't understand how that would work. But if you could help us clarify that. Again, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Sampler, the people, the support staff that's here, I thank you for your passion and your work. It is vital. It is important. America, as I said at the beginning, has invested lives, treasure, It's a very, very important mission. I appreciate your passion on this. This is enlightening. There's more information that we would like to glean from you. But we, again, thank you for your service. We thank you for your patriotism. And God bless those men and women who are actually out there on the front lines in these difficult situations doing the great work. Please know how much, let them know how much we love and care for them, and wish them nothing but the best of success. With that, we will adjourn this hearing today. Thank you.